Greetings, everyone. So, today something was on my mind, and excuse me, I wanted to share with you guys an experience that I had when I was working in the nonprofit world at a call center. And, I had shared with one of the fellow employees my knowledge about trafficking. And she was a melanated woman, and she knew what was going on. I knew what was going on. Anyways, we got into that discussion. So, because where I worked, we handled all kinds of scenarios. And I was commended on one call for helping someone to not take their own lives. And I went against protocol, but in the end, my intuition was right. And the executive director, he sent out like an email memo to everyone commending what I did. And I'm grateful for that. And it's not to tout my own horn. That job was very interesting. It was like a love-hate relationship, because we got a massive amount of phone calls, like a massive amount. And it could, and depending on how long you were there, you would get to do more. And it's a lot. I don't want to complain about the job, but it was a lot. So we would get phone calls. Sometimes, occasionally, we would get suicidal calls. We could three-way patch to mental health as well as police. We would also get phone calls that were paid for by the county that were just to talk to people that had mental health issues. Sometimes that was fairly easy. They just needed someone to talk to. Occasionally you'd get perverts, and they would get completely inappropriate, and then I would always hang up on them. What else? Helping people to find food pantries or food shelves, whatever you call it, where you're at. Everything was stressful, but some of the most stressful calls were people who wanted to get into shelters, especially the men. Don't get me started. So how that worked was various shelters throughout the city would have lists, or no, not lists, but they would have a certain amount of spaces open for people. Women that had children were always priority, and sometimes it was hard to find them shelter if they had more children, like if they had a larger family. While I was working there, I never saw a married couple with children. Hint, hint. What other kind of calls? It was girl, man, it was crazy. Certain calls would take priority, of course. If we had like a suicidal call or someone in mental distress, it was all hands on deck, manager, director, every once in a while the executive director, because he had numerous years of counseling experience. He was actually an amazing dude. I think maybe he was a Freemason. I just think that. He was a nice dude. And what else? I'm trying to go over all the other kind of calls we would get. And me having a big heart, I guess you call me an empath, whatever you want to say. When I first got to that job, I didn't want to just help people. I wanted to pay their rent for 6 months. I wanted to make their family love them. I wanted them to have enough food. I wanted them to have WIC, whatever kind of help I could get them. I went overboard, and I didn't realize what I was doing. And my manager and director would be looking at me like, you can get off the phone now. Anyways, as time went on, I got over that real quick. So I wanted to share this story because I was thinking about the situation with Josiah, and it made my heart sad. And even though I never knew Josiah in person, you can see he's a young man that needs some guidance and some help and some love. So, and I'm not cashing in on this situation. It's just something that was on my mind. And my previous city that I lived in, I lived there for the majority of my life. I lived in New York too. I lived in Texas. I lived in New Mexico for like super short amount of time. I lived in Germany. That, I'm older now. I'm just kind of settled where I'm at. But Milwaukee is it's a diverse city. You have African American, or however you guys decide to identify. I don't project, titles onto people, but melanated people of various cultures there. And so a lot of times, so back to the whole shelter, and I'll get to the trafficking part, sex trafficking. So a lot of the shelters, it's really actually very sad when it comes to young men that need shelter. Now I'm talking about young men that don't have a lot of family support, abusive family, maybe drug addiction or whatever's going on in their families that may, contributed to this situation. There's not a lot of shelter for young men. To me, that is absolutely tragic. And me being the age I was, at the time I was in my late 40s, or mid 40s, something like that. That maternal instinct, it's always there. Even though I didn't birth children, I always have that, and it'll never leave. I think healthy women always have that. And so you would get, just all calls all across the board. In a lot of ways, I got to where I didn't like to do the shelter calls as much, because I forget what it was, but there was this, you guys know how it goes. It always boils down to how much money you're going to get paid. So if you got contracted by various counties, then there were all this data you had to collect, which used to just enrage me. And there is, of course, this job, there was a lot of high turnover, of course. But the management and that I work with were some of the most phenomenal people I've ever worked with. Like, I can't say enough good about them. Now, the capacity of the job was stressful as F. It was rough. And it got so low staff that they even started kind of monitoring your bathroom breaks. It was effing insane. So there was this young, melanated man, African American, however you want to use the term, brown man, young. I don't know, I can't remember if he was 18 or above or younger, but he was at that really, I don't want to cry when I tell this story, because it's still, to this day, it gets me. And he was such a nice young man. So sweet and so intelligent. And he had so much hope for his future. And he wanted to get a nice job. I forget what kind of job he was looking for. I don't remember. But he didn't have any family support, zero. And I don't know why, but that was just how it was. And so he would call our hotline. And I would get him a lot if I was working in the housing, because they would, depending on the day, they would divide it up, who does what, etc. So he would call to see if there was a shelter where he could stay. And as far as resources, just in general, from my experience where I lived in Milwaukee, there was not that many resources for a young man. It's like that old, oh, men need to get up and, pull their bootstraps up and work, or, whatever it is. I'm not sure. But there are a lot of young men that really could use some help. And the reason I get choked up is he was living in a laundromat. And the person who owned the laundromat, I believe he was a male, he felt compassion for this young man, so he was allowing him to live in the laundromat. And that it gets me so choked up. I'm sorry, you guys. Whew. To think that he didn't have anyone to support him. And he was living in this laundromat. And, I don't know. I'm not an expert on homelessness. I've worked a little bit with homeless people. And when I tell you it's something else, it's something else. And I say that, and what I mean by that is that it's the most ultimate stress you'll ever have. Like if you do outreach, you're better off if you want to help. What do they don't call them homeless now, the unhoused. If you want to help unhoused people, you're better off just doing it on your own, to be honest. That's my opinion. So it was just so, and I would always try to encourage him in that. And then I would say, right now we don't have anything open, but, if we do, call back tomorrow, or, whatever I had to say. And it just would just pull at my heartstrings, thinking about this young man. He's a brown young man. And I know that brown men have less opportunities. It's not that they can't make an amazing life of themselves, you know what I mean? But society doesn't. First of all, I think society is less willing to help young men, but especially a brown man, because it's just the way it is, unfortunately. That's not the way my mind thinks, but that's the way, and especially Milwaukee, Wisconsin, unfortunately, that's my birth city, has the history of being very racially prejudiced. It used to be that melanated people, black people, lived on the north side of Milwaukee, and then the white people lived on the south. And it was just, and there's still a lot of problems because of all that history. So it used to really get me, and I would talk to my manager, and she would say to me, everything's going to work out for him, and I don't remember, but she would just encourage me, because if we would have like a call that really got to us, you could talk to, usually it was better to talk to the managers because they had more experience. So that's what I would do. But, okay, so the part I wanted to talk about with the trafficking. So I'm not going to say the names of the shelters in Milwaukee. Now, I had done a lot of research on child trafficking, and not as much on adult trafficking, but I know what's up. Keep telling you guys, go listen to John Wedger. And John Wedger's just, one piece to all of it. But if you guys didn't know, a lot of the child trafficking originates through Child Protective Services. And that's a fact. And that's because it's been infiltrated. That's all I'm going to say. So this particular young man, I had a few conversations with him, and he was telling me about one shelter. I want to say more, but I don't want to give away the identity of the place, because you know what could happen. Not that I'm scared, I don't mean that. I mean, flag my channel or something like that. So, I never saw him in person, but you know how predators are. Especially, like, how do I say this? Like there's no other way to say it, like male homosexual predators. That, I mean, I don't know how other to address that. You know, men who like men, but they're predators. So he was telling me that he went to this particular shelter in our city. That was because we didn't have that many where young men could go. And that he went there. And I've not worked directly in the shelters, gratefully. I mean, I appreciate people that do, but that has to be something else working in those places. But he was telling me that he was in line to take a shower. So I don't know how it all worked, like if they had like a really large group shower or something like that, or if it was kind of like a locker room or something where each man would take a shower individually, you know, like stalls or something. I'm not sure. But he said that when he was waiting in line to take his shower, that these older men were just eyeballing him, you know, like perversely. And he said he just left, thankfully. You guys know. And because I know what I know, and I know that sounds arrogant, but I know what I know, man. I won't talk about it on YouTube because I just don't want to, really. But those men, this is what I think, and he said the same thing. I believe those men were like what I would call handlers. And either they were getting ready to SA him and rope him into some type of sex trafficking, because that's what they do. They go for the young people. And, you know, I can't remember if he was 18 or above, but he was like right around that age, maybe 17, 18. He wasn't 16, I know that, but maybe 17, 18, maybe 20, I don't know, around there. And he said he got this really, really bad vibe. And he left. And he said that that place was known for getting young men to traffic them. So, you know, trafficking is real. And they probably, you know, that kind of predatory behavior happens in the prisons too. And by no means am I a freaking expert on that. I don't profess to be. But we all know. Do I want to say too much? Okay, I'll just say this. I knew someone in my family that had gone to prison, and that happened to him. He was a very handsome young man. So it does happen. It happens every day. And yeah, it just got me to thinking about that. I just get emotional about that. And, you know, my managers and that, like I would cry a lot. Like I remember I had one young woman, and I don't get into that too much because I want to stick to the topic here. But I remember I had one very young woman, African-American young woman, and she was, and see, I don't think she was trying to con me, but she was a young woman with a brand new baby, and she was all worked up. She didn't have formula for the baby or something. And she said she didn't have anybody, and I was like, oh my God, I was just crying, you know. And then as time went on, I understood that with those kinds of situations, sometimes it'll work out. They'll go back home or something like that, you know what I mean? So, but anyways, you know, I always remember that young man, and I wonder what happened to him. I believe he would have been able to turn things around. And as far as like basic resources, like there's a lot of resources for employment and things like that. But, you know, what are you going to do when you don't have a place to live? You know what I mean? But based on his attitude, and there were no indications, zero indications that he had any kind of drug or alcohol issues whatsoever. That usually, you know, you'll find that out. But I mean, you know, it's just a phone call. But I had spoken to him several times. And when someone is in mental crisis, you need to help them. And I did that a lot, and I'm proud of that. And honestly, I did that a lot before I became, officially a social worker. It's just, what I'm wired for. But a few things I want to say before I sign off here is that there are some resources for people that are in suicidal ideation. And I'm really glad that Henry was able to get a mental health crisis team out there to help Josiah. Because one of the videos that I was watching by Streets, my heart dropped. I thought it was going to be something else. I was very worked up. And I'm glad that Josiah is getting help right now. But for people that are suicidal, and I'm a veteran, so I'm familiar with certain types of resources, there are a lot of hotlines that will help as well. I personally, for veterans, they have a basic veteran. I think they have a basic veterans crisis line that is tied to the VA system. I don't like it. But there are a lot of resources out there for young people in crisis. So anyways, I just wanted to share that with you guys. And that's the good. I mean, America's really screwed up, but one thing we do have is resources. And sometimes the resources are not the best. And it's just, sometimes you just have to work with what you've got. But being empathic, I don't know if that's a word. Is it empathetic? Having compassion or empathy, that's free. So anyways, you guys, that's my story. I hope that that rang a note with you guys. You have an amazing day or night wherever you are. Peace.